And we have a very interesting topic. If you need more troubled times, then we will have a section on the panel on troubled times in divided world. And this topic will be introduced by a keynote speaker, Professor Wede, who is a professor of sociology, as I know, and a professor from the University of Köln and Bonn, and will speak about the topic. And then we will have Federico Fernandez, senior research fellow from the Austrian Economic Center, and then some time, if there is time, for question and answers, and then we will close this afternoon. So Professor, the floor is yours. I just recommend to use the mic, it helps. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my topic is troubled times in a divided world. I'm also an analyst of national security affairs. I've done my PhD research and my habilitation on that topic. So forget the fact that I made my money in sociology. It was not necessarily the topic where my heart was in. So, conflict essentially is a default condition of world politics. So by and large, troubled times are the default condition of world politics. And currently we return to the default condition, to troubled times. After World War II, the West became unified under American hegemony. This was an American empire. Let's be honest about it. Everything else is diplomatic claptrap or hypocrisy. But let me say, it was an empire by invitation. There existed a second empire, and Hungary was part of the second empire of the Soviet Empire, as was East Germany. And the Soviet Empire was not an empire by invitation. So there is a major difference between these two types of empires. It's a qualitative difference. It's a difference between an empire where everyone was a subject and an empire which respected individual liberty. But the time of the American empire, of American hegemony, is more or less over. At least it's receding. Why? The basis of the American empire, of this empire by invitation, of Western unity always was economic freedom and the prosperity derived from economic freedom. And currently the Western world suffers from an economic crisis, and this economic crisis is not really going away. Of course, in countries like my own, we have economic growth rates in between 1% and 2%, depending on the year. If we come close to 2%, we believe we have a good year. By contrast, the Chinese, if they suffer from economic growth rates of 6.5%, they think they suffer from a crisis. So our successes are small, and people feel that we suffer from a crisis, especially because after-tax incomes of ordinary people more or less stagnate, at least in real terms and after taxes. Some people have some minor gains, other people have some minor losses, but by and large, if you want the crude picture, it's one of stagnation more or less all over Europe. And my main argument, I'm not a user of Twitter, but I'm a friend of one-liners, and so let me summarize my presentation with a one-liner. Western unity has been undermined by government incompetence and failure. Full stop. All of our problems derive from government and bad decisions. They derive from the persistent expansion of government in the last decades. The first sign of our persistent crisis and of our lack of confidence in economic freedom is that the common transatlantic market to complement NATO, this was a project which was not really killed by Trump. It was in a process of dying much before Trump. I know of no important continental European politician who was ready to spend political capital on the defense of this failed free trade project. Certainly, my Chancellor, Angela Merkel, was not one of the promoters of that free trade project. She occasionally paid lip service to it, but only lip service. It was never a serious political project. She never tried to argue against the many critics from the left, which we have in Germany. The second government failure, which somehow guarantees slow growth in Europe, was the establishment of the euro. I think with the euro, our politicians, they invented a negative sum game. And a negative sum game is one where the losers lose more than the few winners win. And the euro definitely was a negative sum game. Let me point only to the two most important kind of losers. One group of losers is North and Central European taxpayers. We inherit the debt burden of Latin European and Greek governments. We are made responsible for it. Economists dispute how big the burden, for example, for German taxpayers are. But they put it in the order of magnitude between 500 billion and 1,000 billion euros. In order to appreciate what this number means, 300 billion euros is the central government budget of the Federal Republic of Germany. So we are not talking about peanuts. The losses of North European taxpayers are significant. But this doesn't say that the euro is good for Greeks or Italians or Spaniards. They get the money, they get some kind of debt relief. But they also have youth unemployment rates close to 50%. And in some countries, for some period of time, it was above 50%. And this, of course, is a catastrophe. Nobody can say that Greece is a winner from the euro, nor is Germany. But our politicians, skillful as they are, they have succeeded in inventing a game where almost everybody is a loser, except the politicians who don't admit that they have committed an error. The third sign of our lack of faith in economic freedom is the rescuing of the euro. What is the basic principle? I don't want to go into the details. I will not tell you about ECB interventions. I will not tell you about the ESM fund and what it does and all these technicalities. I will tell you about the basic principle. The basic principle is that we establish a second tier of the welfare state. The first tier of the welfare state is a national welfare state. We have that in Germany, the French have it, the Swedes have it. You probably have a kind of welfare state on a shoestring from a German perspective because you are still a poorer country, but you also have it. The welfare state, because of the graying of our societies, is unsustainable. And if you are in a hole, you should stop digging. But our politicians, they continue digging. Having an unsustainable first tier of the welfare state at the national level, they decided we need a second or European tier of the welfare state. And now German taxpayers are not only asked to pay for poor Germans, no, now we get the privilege of paying for poor Greeks, and tomorrow probably for poor Italians and poor Portuguese too. This is another sign of a lack of confidence in economic freedom. Our politicians believe in planning. Even if they call themselves Christian Democrats, sometimes even liberal Democrats, they are social democrats at heart. They never think of what is good for the taxpayer of their own nation. The national interest of the taxpayer is a no-go area of West European politicians. Now, establishing a second level of the welfare state on top of an unsustainable first level is not good enough for our politicians. They want something greater. And Angela Merkel is among those who are most eager to do something greater, something to reflect her personal and political importance. She wants to establish open borders. What is open borders? Open borders means that rich countries should feel obliged to admit poor people from the third world once they utter the words refugee or asylum. And this can mean mass migration. This mass migration affected Germany in the year 2015, last time, when we admitted nearly 1 million poor people. German economists have produced estimates of what that might cost the German taxpayer in the long run. One estimate, and it's not the highest, it's not the worst, is in the long run this will cost 450 billion euros to the German taxpayer. Remember again, 300 billion is a central government budget. So this is 150% of that. And at the same time, our Minister of Finance is proud of making no new debt, except, of course, hidden debts, which will fall due once our politicians are out of office. And out of office means out of mind. So open borders are incompatible with the welfare state, and it does not really make sense to build a third level on a second level, on a first level of an unsustainable welfare state. Let me come to Brexit. I'm deeply convinced that Brexit would not have happened if continental Europeans would not have committed a long series of errors. Even avoiding the last serious error, only 2 years ago, of opening the doors of Germany and Sweden, and for 1 year even of Austria, to poor Muslim migrants, irrespective of the question of whether they fit in, whether they are willing to integrate, or whether some of them might not only be non-Europeans, but anti-Europeans at heart. Asking this question opens you to the charge of racism in Germany. And I guess even here the situation might not be much better. Had we avoided that mistake, I think the numbers in the British referendum would have been different. Probably 52% Remain and 49% for Brexit. So I think Angela Merkel belongs to those who are responsible for Brexit. And the real thing is that it never crossed her mind what is more important for Germans. It also never crossed her mind what is more important for poor people in the third world. And what is most important for poor people in the third world is a massive defense of free trade. There have been estimates of what free trade and globalization did for poor people in the third world in order to cross the poverty threshold. And the estimate of what free trade did for poor people is in the order of magnitude of 1 billion people. If you count together all those who found asylum or refuge in rich countries, you arrive at a number which is certainly below 10 million. That is, even if your only interest were to assist poor people in the third world, you should know that free trade and the defense of free trade is much, much more important by a factor of 100 than admitting refugees or asylum claimants. But that never crossed her mind. Merkel and most of our social democratic politicians all over Europe never think in terms of efficiency. Efficiency is neoliberalism, and it has to be fought in this frame of mind. The election of a protectionist president in the United States is a problem. I think in a way it also testifies to the lack of popularity of economic freedom, of our insufficient confidence in economic freedom and in its effectiveness. I am not 100% critic of Trump, nor am I 100% defender of Trump. I think one can rationally evaluate Trump's policy ideas, and I think some of them are reasonable and some of them are less reasonable. Let me paint a very crude picture of Trump's policy and address only what I believe to be the three most important foreign policy issues or national security issues for the West: Islam, Russia, China. Concerning Islam, I think all the theories which specialists of international relations have invented do not say anything, with one exception, that is Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And his much forgotten recommendation is very simple. We cannot do anything about it except closing our borders. And that Trump recognizes. I approve of him in this respect. Of course, there are technical problems, there are legal problems, and I don't have the time to go into that, but the basic idea is mass migration by Muslims into rich countries causes problems, which mass migration by other types of people, let's say Chinese or Hindus from India, would not pose. So there is a difference between Muslims and non-Muslims, and it's only common sense to admit it. The second problem is Russia. And here, the instinctive problem of the instinctive reaction of Trump was meaningful. His instinctive reaction was what was advocated by adherents of the realist school of world politics all the time. The most prominent current defender of the school of thought is John Mearsheimer of the University of Chicago. For him, great power politics has always been and will always be a tragedy. So there is no way of getting out of this bad world into a better world. But we can analyze realities, power ratios, options. And doing that with Russia leads to a very simple analysis. Russia is a decaying country and therefore does not need to be contained. Very easy. In the long run, armaments cost money. And running an arms race against the US, the strongest economy in the world, costs a lot of money. What is the size of the Russian economy? It's currently 1/10 of it. And there is no reason to believe that relative to the American economy, the Russians can keep their economy as strong as 1/10 of the American. There are two reasons for that. The first is demography. The demographic outlook for the United States is much better than that of Russia. And the second one is Putin's economic policies. He does a containment of Russia by himself, by not permitting economic freedom in his country. And if you have a graying country without economic freedom, then it's clear there is only one way forward for your country, and that is downhill. And that's why Russia does not need to be contained. Unfortunately, in this respect, Trump has already been contained by the establishment, the strategic establishment of the United States. So his reasonable ideas are already buried. Of course, Trump also has some ideas about economic policies and about China. Concerning China, current estimates of the economic size of China vary in between about 60% and 100%. But one thing is clear, the Chinese economy still enjoys the advantages of backwardness. America does not enjoy the advantages of backwardness because it's at the front of economic and technological development, and such countries cannot enjoy this kind of advantage. And that means unless the Chinese do very stupid things in their economic policy, there is no way of preventing the Chinese economy overgrowing the American economy. In one generation, the Chinese economy might be twice as large as the American economy. So, if world politics is a tragedy, then, in a way, the country to look at is China, not Russia. If we try to contain Russia, what is the likely effect of economic sanctions on Russia? We make Russia into a Chinese client state. The economic size ratio between China and Russia is not too different from the one between the Soviet Union and Poland a couple of years ago. So, do we really want to do that? Are the Obamas, the Clintons, the Merkels, and all our governing elites, are they so stupid that they want to turn Russia into the treasure chest of the Chinese economy? I think it makes no sense at all, but unfortunately, Trump has already been contained. Think of the possibility, of the likelihood that China might become a much stronger economy than the United States. What shall we do? One option would be adding a North Atlantic community to NATO, or further unifying the West. This would not be an aggressive measure. And then the West would be twice as large as the United States. That would help us for another generation, and this time might be used to socialize China into the current economic order. Let me finally mention a second school of thought in world politics. The second school of thought goes under very different labels. One label, which has been used a couple of decades ago, was idealism. A second label, which has been used, is liberalism in the 19th century sense, as we use it in classical liberalism. And a current version of this school of thought even talks of a capitalist peace. And I belong to this final school of thought. We argue, and there is econometric type evidence to support our views, we argue that economic interdependence promotes the avoidance of war, that economic interdependence promotes prosperity, which in itself makes conflict less likely, that prosperity promotes democracy, which again in itself makes war less likely. So the avoidance of protectionism, and here I think I'm very close to the other speakers, the avoidance of protectionism is important. So let me end my presentation with a wish. The reasonable ideas of Trump have already been contained by the establishment. Let's hope that his one major unreasonable idea will be contained by the establishment too. Thank you very much for your patience.
My name is Federico Fernandez. I'm with the Austrian Economic Center. The Austrian Economic Center is the main organizer of the Free Market Roadshow. We organize events such as the one you are attending in 45 cities in 40 countries across Europe, from Spain to Ukraine and Georgia, from Sweden to Austria. We are very happy for being here, and we thank the university and our local partners of the Danube Institute. Very quickly, I've been living in Europe for the last 3 years and a half, but I am from Argentina, and being from Argentina, unfortunately, we have a lot of knowledge about populism. And one of the things that it's really surprising for me, and for many people of course, is that populism seems to be on the run in Latin America, with the sad exception of Venezuela, which is by now a humanitarian crisis. Many other countries, mine included, are getting rid of populism. The case of Argentina is very important. 2 years ago, populism was defeated in open elections, which were almost fair. Of course, they are never fair in Argentina, let alone when you have a populist government. But regardless of that, they were defeated and they had to leave. In Brazil, there's a very interesting process. Peru is a country that has been doing very well for 15 years or so. Chile, the same. Uruguay, the same. Colombia is improving greatly.
A market intervention. This young man was going to see if maybe.
No, don't worry, it's not necessary,
No?
really.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So there are a lot of very hopeful happenings in Latin America. But it seems, most of our economies are agricultural based, we export a lot, and it seems now that we are exporting populism, and populism is moving from Latin America to Europe. We have in Greece, Alexis Tsipras, what he said in the parliament, I wish we had become Argentina. I don't know, maybe in football that could be, but in other ways, I don't know. In Spain, the Podemos party is very popular. They were very close to become part of the government, and they are the third most popular party. Of course, there's the case of France also, and I will talk a little bit about France. So just a few features. I don't have much time because we have to finish at 7, but just a few features about populism, particularly in the Latin American branch. There's a political theorist from the Netherlands, Cas Mudde. He says populisms should be studied as they appeared in different regions, but I think there's a lot of common threads. And I will go quickly, and I would say the feature that you find in every populism is not, of course, only of populism, but you find in every populism, regarding as left wing or right wing, is the hatred for free market economy. And that is something we found in every of the Latin American experiences of populism. Populism acted as a syndrome. Really, it's not an ideology. It's very difficult to define. It's a syndrome. It infects the Republican and democratic institutions of the country, and it destroys them from the inside. In countries such as mine, with weak institutions, the destruction can be very quickly and almost total. In Venezuela, unfortunately, I believe the destruction has been total, and we are witnessing that now. A second feature that unfortunately Venezuela shows very well nowadays is that populism is not necessarily totalitarian, but if you give them time and they don't destroy the country at a rate that they have to leave power, they will become totalitarian. And unfortunately, as we speak today, the Venezuelan government is killing its citizens, you know, when they demonstrate against things such as closing the parliament and things like that are happening in Venezuela today. And last week, for instance, a 24-year-old girl was shot in the head just for being demonstrated in the streets of Caracas. And the third thing that populism has is that this idea that every institution, could it be an institution that is part of the government or an institution of civil society, they have to be destroyed, because the only important person, populists all the time are talking about the people, and they are for the people, and the people this, the people that, the people is so important. But the only one who cares and ends up denied these so-called people is the leader. The only one that matters is the leader. In the case of Venezuela, it was the late and unfaithfully departed Hugo Chavez, and now Nicolás Maduro, in Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, etc., in Bolivia, Evo Morales. And that is the only figure he is like incarnates the people, ends up denying the people that they are so interested in. And the contact between the people of the masses has to be direct. So there's no need of any institution that mediates that contact. Of course, that is why they want to close the parliament, and the other greatest enemy of every populist government is the press. And the press and the media. And the media is not only, you know, the traditional media, newspapers, TV channels, etc., but social media, you know, Twitter, Facebook, they also become part of the enemy. Because I don't have time and I would like to leave a couple of minutes for questions, I just would like to finish my remarks with two things. This is a small list that yesterday I took a look at the the economic proposals of Marine Le Pen in France. This is what she wants to do with the French economy if she wins. She wants to leave the EU. Of course, you know, this is for her political nationalism, and also because she wants to recover French monetary sovereignty. Of course, this means, you know, to start again the printing presses to print as much money and as quickly as possible. This maybe would help to bring cheap credit to the French. I don't know if it will bring that, but it will definitely bring a lot of inflation. Of course, she talks about smart protectionism, raising tariffs, and put the consumer at the service of producers, because that is what is protectionism in the end. She wants to bring back economic planning. She talks about a reindustrialization of France, under, of course, the guidance of the government, because we all know the government knows best. And she also wants to apply a lot of different stimuli, such as raise public spending, lowering the retirement age. This is frankly suicidal. All European pension systems are in the way of bankruptcy, and she wants to accelerate that. I don't know, maybe she wants to bring privatization in the end. And she wants to raise the salaries of the public employees. I mean, that must be very nice for public employees. All this, I understand. Just one final remark. A few years ago, the Der Spiegel made an interview with the French philosopher Alain Finkielkraut, and on that interview, Finkielkraut says that there are a lot of people in France that it's not that they are afraid of the other, but they are afraid of becoming the other themselves. And this probably has to do with a couple of things that Professor Wede mentioned, certain tendencies, demographic tendencies that you have in Europe nowadays. I sympathize with this vision, and I really think that is a problem. The only thing is that when we take all the other part, what I just mentioned, we could agree that there's a fire, but I don't think Thank you, thank you. Maybe we agree that there's a fire and there's a lot of problems, but I wouldn't hire a pyromaniac firefighter to put the fire out. Thank you very much.